All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at what would easily be the most explosive hypothetical geopolitical event since the collapse of the Soviet Union. We are talking about a full, official merger between the United States and the United Kingdom by the year 2040. Now, to be clear, this isn't just tightening up the historic special relationship, and it's definitely not just another trade deal. No, we're looking at the birth of a totally integrated transatlantic behemoth that would fundamentally rewrite the rules of global power and literally reshape the world we live in.
To really wrap our heads around how this would work, we're going to break it down into three parts. First, the transatlantic behemoth. 2, a class of systems. And 3, the global shockwave.
So just picture this for a second. You literally fuse the world's financial capital in New York with the tech and innovation hubs of Silicon Valley. Then you back it up with the globally extended American military machine, and finally you weave in the massive cultural and historic powerhouse of London. You're creating a single, multi-continental state united by shared language, legal heritage, and intelligence integration. I mean, it sounds completely invincible on paper, right? But the reality of actually executing this? It's incredibly complex.
Okay, let's move into Section 1, the transatlantic behemoth, and take a look at the superpower blueprint.
Before we get into the challenges, we have to talk about the raw data of what this merger creates on day one, because the numbers are just absolutely staggering. Combined, we're looking at roughly 442 million citizens. Militarily, this new union would command over 5,200 nuclear warheads, all under one single unified command structure. And naval projection is off the charts with 13 carrier strike groups. To put that into perspective, that equates to total unassailable ocean dominance. They would control global shipping lanes and maritime choke points with absolute authority. Oh, and diplomatically, they consolidate their UN Security Council seats into one unified super veto. And economically, it's absolute supremacy. This new union would boast a combined gross domestic product of around $44.5 trillion. Think about that for a second. A single nation-state controlling over a quarter of the entire global economy. They'd completely dominate global trade, dictate financial regulations, and set the pace for technological innovation. They would establish an economic lead that would be practically impossible for any global competitor to catch.
Which brings us to Section 2, a clash of systems. Because, as you'll see, what looks terrifyingly powerful from a bird's-eye view turns into an absolute administrative nightmare on the ground.
Right out of the gate, you have a massive collision of core identities. You are trying to seamlessly weld a hyper-capitalist republic, which, let's remember, was literally born out of a rebellion against the crown, to a traditional constitutional monarchy deeply rooted in centuries of royal history. These are fundamentally different ways of viewing the state and national identity. You can't just sign a piece of paper and expect those deep-seated cultural foundations to instantly click together.
And that brings up the massive elephant in the room. This instantly sparks one of the most fascinating questions of the whole merger. What in the world happens to the British royal family? The U.S. Constitution strictly forbids granting titles of nobility. You absolutely cannot have a king or queen in an American-style republic. So how on earth do you integrate a nation where the monarch is the literal head of state?
Well, according to the analysts, the most likely compromise would be the creation of a special State of Britain. Within this regional framework, the royal family stays, but their role changes completely. They would exist purely as a localized cultural and historical institution. The monarchy gets completely stripped of any constitutional authority, basically transforming into a highly respected heritage organization rather than an actual branch of government.
Now, structurally, integrating the actual government would require massive compromises. The UK would likely have to break up into 4 distinct states just for federal representation: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. This is what gets them a voice and direct representation in a newly revamped transatlantic Senate over in Washington.
But here is the harsh political reality for British voters. Coming in at roughly 72 million people, they are stepping into this union as the definitive junior partners. When it comes to federal elections or trying to pass sweeping legislation, the British voting bloc would be mathematically swamped by the sheer weight of 370 million American voters. And that demographic imbalance? It's like trying to mix oil and water when it comes to policy. Staying entirely neutral here, just look at the flashpoints. You'd have the UK population fiercely fighting to protect their national health service from privatization by American healthcare conglomerates. At the same time, the British states would likely demand strict federal gun control measures, proposals that the American half of the population would, for sure, fiercely resist. The friction here would just be monumental.
So to stop all this internal chaos from instantly crashing the economy on day one, administrators would have to get really creative. They'd likely use a brilliant loophole, a dual currency peg. Instead of forcing everyone onto a single currency overnight, they keep both the Atlantic dollar and the sterling pound, pegging them at a fixed exchange rate. It acts like a bridge, stabilizing the markets and preventing a systemic shockwave while they work toward full economic integration over a couple of decades.
Okay, let's zoom back out for Section 3, the global shockwave and the ensuing geopolitical shift. Because while this new union is busy arguing over healthcare and currency, the rest of the world definitely isn't going to just sit back and watch in silence.
First, look at continental Europe. They would view the UK permanently anchoring itself to Washington as a catastrophic betrayal. The EU would be thrown into a complete existential crisis. They'd realize they can't rely on NATO anymore since it would be totally dominated by this new transatlantic giant. So, just to survive, the EU would be forced to rapidly federalize its militaries, forging a unified European army, likely led by France and Germany. That alone completely rewrites the balance of power in Europe. Meanwhile, the reaction on the other side of the globe would be even more extreme. Beijing and Moscow would look at this $44 trillion nuclear-armed behemoth and see the ultimate existential threat aimed right at them. They'd have no choice but to respond. We'd see them upgrade from strategic partnerships into a rigid, formal military alliance, pulling heavily on resource-rich nations across Central Asia and the Global South just to build a coalition big enough to counter it.
So what does this all mean? The inescapable chain reaction of this merger is pretty chilling. The planet is almost instantly ripped into two cleanly divided, heavily armed halves. The complexities of our current multipolar world just vanish, and humanity is thrown violently back into a strict, highly polarized, bipolar Cold War.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative thought, straight from the source material. A union of this scale proves a fascinating point. Maybe geographic barriers, like an entire ocean, actually matter far less than shared heritage and institutional integration. As the source describes it, this would be a brilliant yet deeply volatile attempt to extend Western global dominance into the next millennium. But here's the real question to walk away with. Would the internal cultural chaos tear it apart from the inside before the rest of the world even had a chance to react? Definitely something to think about.